Hello and welcome back to the OSM channel. In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to change out the rear brakes on a Hyundai Kona. This car in particular is a 2018 model, but this will cover other years as well. Now, if you're looking for the video on how to change out the front brakes, please look in the description down below. I will leave a link for that video as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is chock the wheels on the opposite side of the car that we're working on. So I'm working on the passenger side. I'm going to chock the wheels on the driver's side. Because this car is equipped with wheel locks, what we need to do is go in our trunk and look for the wheel lock kit. Alright, so with the car still on the ground, we need to crack all these lug nuts loose. Now for the non-locking lug nuts, I would recommend a 13/16 inch socket. And then for the locking lug nut, we just found our special removal socket located in the trunk. So we're going to put that over our locking lug nut, spin it until we hear it go in. That just clicked in place. And then for the socket size that fits the top of this, I found that a 21mm socket fits the best. So take our 2-foot long breaker bar, apply pressure, twist this counterclockwise. That one's broke loose. Swap this out for the 13/16. Crack the rest of these loose. Now because I'm changing out the front brakes and the rear brakes, but in this video it'll either be one or the other, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jack the car up in the center, and then I'm going to support the front and the rear with jack stands. So placement of the jack would be about in the center of the front door panel. So what you're looking for, you're looking to ensure that you position your jack on this blue rail right here. Ensure that you're not pushing up on this plastic panel. So I'm going to go ahead and start jacking up this car. Alright, now we need to install jack stands on the front of the car and the rear of the car. So this is right behind the front tire. What you're looking for, this blue rail, see how there's kind of like a little cutout here and here? Well, that's where you're going to take the jack, lift it up, and just position this right in between those two little cutouts there. Here we are right in front of the rear tire. You can see the blue rail, the two little cutouts right there. Take our jack stand, lift it up, right on the rail. Then what I like to do is lower the car down a little bit so some of the car's weight is on the jack stand, like so. Now that we have the car safely supported with the jack and the secondary jack stands, what we're going to do is remove the rear tire at this point. So we're just going to remove these lugs. And if the tire gets a little stuck on there, just give it a little kick. If kicking the tire doesn't work, carefully take a lump hammer and tap the tire while rotating. There we go. Now we can take the tire off the rest of the way. So now that we have the rear tire removed, what we need to do is take a 14mm socket, and we need to remove the bolts for the slide pins that hold the caliper piston bracket onto the caliper bracket. So there's a 14mm bolt here and a 14mm bolt right here. With those two 14mm fasteners removed, we can take a pry bar and pry this assembly away from the brake caliper bracket. We can utilize a hanging hook and try and find a good location to hang this up and get this out of the way. We can take our pry bar now and begin prying away the brake pads from the rotor. Now to remove the caliper bracket, there's a 14mm fastener here and here that we need to remove. Now carefully remove the caliper bracket away from the rotor. Put this off to the side. We'll service this shortly. So now we need to remove the rotor, and in order to remove the rotor, we need to remove this screw and this screw. So what I like to use, 3/8 inch drive ratchet with an adapter for a number 3 Phillips head. Put that on the end of the ratchet like so. what I like to do, insert it into the screw. And from here what I'll do is I'll take a hammer and lightly tap the end of the ratchet while applying torque to the ratchet. And take a pry bar and hold the rotor in place. But you can see with a few taps, you can see how easily that screw breaks loose. I know I probably should have bolts on the threads here, but just kind of want to show you how this actually works. So again, we'll try this upper screw right here. A few taps with the hammer while applying torque. That screw broke loose very easily. So if you don't live in the salt belt, there's a good chance your rotor might just fall off. But I live in the northeast salt belt, so this rotor is a bit stuck to the hub. So the area we want to hit is in between these bolts. So I'm going to take the back of a ball peen hammer, give this a couple whacks. And you can also take a chisel or a big punch. Get a big lump hammer out now. I'll give this a couple whacks on the rotor. As you can see, popped right off. Beautiful. So this hub is pretty clean. There's a little bit of rust on here, but what you want to do, you want to take a wire wheel or a wire brush and just clean off as much rust off this hub as possible. The issue is if there's a rust buildup on this hub and you go to apply your new rotor, it could cause the rotor to be improperly balanced and you could get a vibration or a shimmy. So always ensure that you get this hub as clean as possible. So we'll clean this up with a wire wheel, and then we'll apply a very light coat of anti-seize to the hub. That way in the future when we need to replace this rotor, it will not stick to the hub. Now what you want to do, take your new rotor, take some brake parts cleaner or starting fluid. What you want to do is just spray off the surface of the rotor where the pads sit, because when they ship these rotors, there's a very light layer of oil on the rotor, and we want to just get that oil off to ensure that as soon as we start driving the car that there's no delayed braking action. Alright, so we have our light layer of Never Seize applied to the hub. Now we can go ahead and install our new rotor, ensuring that the holes line up for the holding screws. Now we can reinstall those screws. I like to give it a little tap with the hammer to ensure it's seated. That is good. Alright, now we need to compress this caliper piston, and this caliper piston, you can't take a C-clamp like you would on a traditional brake caliper and just compress it in. This one you need to compress and twist, and the easiest way to do that is with one of these brake caliper compression tools. Now because we're on the right hand side of the car, we're going to utilize the compression tool labeled RH, which stands for right hand. So for this car I found that adapter plate number 6 works best for this caliper, so I'm going to put the adapter plate over the caliper. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin this nut counterclockwise, which will pull this plate against the bracket. Once that's tight, what I'm going to do is spin this handle clockwise, and what's going to happen, this is going to do two things. It's going to push on the piston, and it's also going to rotate it at the same time, allowing us to push this piston back in. That's just bottomed out. So loosen up this backing plate, and we'll take the tool out of here. Really important step that I missed a moment ago. So when you're compressing the piston for your brake caliper, ensure that these two recessed holes are at a 90-degree angle with the bracket, like so. That's really important because when you go to reinstall this over the brake pads, look at the brake pads. On both brake pads, the outer and the inner have these two little tabs. So those little holes are going to line up with these two tabs on the inside brake pad. So if you have that off a little bit, it's not going to work properly. Your brakes are going to be messed up. So just ensure that those two holes, again, 90-degree angle with the brake caliper bracket. To service this caliper bracket, the first thing we need to check are the sliding pins able to slide in and out freely, and both of these are, so that's a good sign. So what we're going to do, we're going to pop these slide pins out of their rubber boot. See all that nasty grease on there? I like to clean this up. So we'll take a clean cloth, wipe all that grease off. I like to insert it in the hole once more, give it a good spin. Just try and get as much of that old grease out of there. So get all that grease off. Now what I'll do, I'll take some ceramic brake parts lubricant and I'll lubricate this slide pin. Now if these slide pins have a lot of rust, you have two options. You could either replace these slide pins, which that is probably the best thing to do, or you could sand them down with sandpaper until they slide smoothly in and out of the boot. Also a good idea to replace the boot, but we have this pin lubricated, so I'm going to rotate this and push it back into the boot. Push it down over the boot until the boot pops over the lip on the bolt. Can burp out a little bit of air. But now we have a nice, smooth, responsive slide pin. So we'll do the same thing to the other slide pin here. Alright, both these slide pins are in good shape and they're very responsive, so what we need to do now is work on these slide brackets. So these slide brackets on the caliper bracket play a critical role in proper braking function. What happens over time is, especially if you live in the Northeast, dust and rust will build up underneath these slide brackets. So it's really important that you pop these slide brackets off. You'll probably see a good bit of schmutz fall out. But just take a flathead screwdriver and pop that out. Take a look at all this schmutz underneath these slide brackets. That's no good. We're going to have to get all that out of there. It reduces the clearance between the two ears of the brake pad. So what can happen, the brake pad will actually get seized or stuck inside this caliper bracket, and therefore causing excessive drag, rapid brake pad wear, and your car is just fighting the brakes. So that's no good. So it's really important that you clean this off really well. So what I'm going to do now, take this little wire wheel on my Makita drill and I'm just going to clean this surface off till it's nice and shiny. So that is what the surface where our slide pin brackets should go on should look like. It's nice and clean, shiny, no rust buildup. So again, we'll take a little bit of brake parts, lubricant, ceramic brake parts lube. We'll coat both sides. And this should just help to prevent rust and corrosion from forming underneath these slides. We'll take the new slide. This is pretty simple. It just pops right in here, had it upside down. So just push it down into place. And I like to take a hammer, give it a couple taps, ensure that it's firmly seated on there. This side's good. Do the same thing on the other side. Couple taps. Alright, and this caliper bracket is in good shape and ready to be reinstalled. So now let's reinstall this brake caliper bracket. Alright, now we're just about ready to install our brake pads, but before we install our brake pads, I always like to take a little bit of the ceramic brake parts lube, put a little bit of lubrication on the slide brackets, ensuring that I do not touch the rotor. If you get this stuff on the rotor, immediately wipe it off, because this will significantly reduce your braking. So for the rear brake pads, they should look very similar, only one brake pad will have this little metal tab known as, I think it's called the screecher or the squealer. So that's going to go on the inside, and its purpose, when that brake pad wears down till there's just about nothing left, that metal will come in contact with the rotor and make an awful screeching sound, telling you that it's time to replace the brakes. So we'll start with the outside pad. Outside pad is not going to have the screecher, so I normally come in at like a 45-degree angle. You're just looking for the ears of the brake pad to line up into the slide tabs here. So after I get a brake pad set, I normally like to slide it on and off the rotor a little bit just to ensure that it slides freely in the slide brackets. If you find that the brake pad is binding, then that probably means you didn't clean off the brake caliper bracket enough underneath the slide bracket. So I'd recommend taking everything off and cleaning that very thoroughly. But this is functioning properly. So we'll do the same thing with the inner brake pad. So again, coming in at a 45-degree angle and rotating towards the drum. Pull it on and off, make sure it slides freely. And it's sliding freely. And then also what we need to do, there are these two little springs, and these are very simple to install. So there's a little hole at the top and bottom of each pad. So simply take these springs, insert it in the small hole like so, push it in, do the same thing on the bottom. Beautiful. You can see how those pads are pushing off the rotor as intended. So now we can go ahead and reinstall the brake caliper. We'll take this off the hook, carefully slide this over our brake pads. That went really smooth. And we can reinstall our bolts for our slide pins. Now we can reinstall the tire. Now we can carefully jack back up the car to take all the weight off the jack stands. Remove the jack stands, and we will slowly lower the car back down. Now with the car back on the ground, the final thing we need to do is torque all these lugs down. According to my research, these lugs should be torqued to 90 foot-pounds. So take your torque wrench, set it to 90 foot-pounds, and we'll start torquing these lugs in a star pattern. Now, of course, repeat the process on the other side of the car. Once you finish the other side of the car, before you remove the wheel chocks, come in the car, pump the brakes several times until the brakes become firm. I feel that the brakes are firm. Now you can go ahead, remove the chocks, and that is how you replace the rear brakes on a Hyundai Kona. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing. I will leave links to the products used in this video in the description down below, and as always, I will catch you on the next one.